What happens when you're caught off guard in a tense conversation? Do you flee, fight, try to fix it? This week, I talk with Jeremy Hurewitz, author of Sell Like a Spy and Corporate Consultant, to explore how to manage emotional intensity in high stakes moments and how we can learn powerful communication skills from an unexpected source: spies and hostage negotiators. Jeremy draws on years of working alongside intelligence professionals such as FBI hostage negotiators, CIA case officers, and special forces to teach practical strategies for emotional regulation, active listening, and managing difficult conversations. Here, Jeremy shares why connection and empathy are the superpowers of elite negotiators and how we can translate those same skills to our workplace and personal relationships. We talk about what to do when emotions run high, how to tell the difference between personal and situational conflict, and why learning to let someone vent might be the best first step in diffusing tension. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Jeremy. It's so great to have you here today. I'd love to start by inviting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you. So I started my career off overseas. I was a journalist based out of Prague and Shanghai for about a decade. I went abroad right after college with a backpack and a guitar. Just wanted a sense of adventure and wanted to experience a different kind of life. And I suppose I did so. I freelanced for a variety of publications around the world, and I also helped build a media association called Project Syndicate, which I'm still quite proud of. They're still thriving. Coming back to New York, I entered into the space of corporate consulting, specifically the world of intelligence and security. And I worked closely on sensitive matters with CIA case officers, FBI agents, including several former chief hostage negotiators, members of the special forces, the Secret Service, a variety of different top government officials. And I really learned some extraordinary things from these amazing individuals. And I had been thinking about those lessons and how I've applied them for quite a while. And during COVID, I decided to write a book, which became the book Sell Like a Spy, which is part memoir on, perhaps an unlikely career, an unconventional career, and part handbook on communication strategies sourced from these elite government officials about how to build rapport, connect with people, negotiate, diffuse emotional encounters, a variety of different things. And these days, I do quite a bit of keynote speaking, talks, training sessions, and I'm also an advisor to a corporate intelligence firm called Interfor International.
That's a really fascinating background. I'm sure you've met all kinds of interesting figures. And how do you synthesize those experiences? Is there sort of an anchor framework or some? I'm sure you wrote a book, so I'm not asking you to give away your secret sauce, but just curious. When you think about the different conversations that you've had and what you've learned from so many of these people, what are sort of the roots that you still hang on to?
Yeah, I mean, the roots are listening and empathy and curiosity. You see these threaded through this elite skills of case officers from the CIA, from FBI hostage negotiators. I always tell people that active listening is the most essential skill amongst all of these skills, and everything flows from being a good listener. But people are bad listeners. We all listen with an intention to reply, not an intention to understand. Sometimes you meet people who are natural introverts and they have a gift for listening. I always challenge audiences or groups I'm training to think of the best listener they've ever experienced, and inevitably they share and agree with me that they have a very high opinion of that person. So the bedrock, the connective tissue, if you will, of all of these things is being a good listener, someone who makes the other side feel respected, understood. I always say that people want to give comfort and they seek comfort. So if you can be a person who provides that comfort, that is a great way to build rapport. And whether it's sales, and I describe sales as kind of skills for everyday life, and I say that people buy from those that they like, and people remember how you made them feel. So case officers are so good at that, about empathizing, about winning people over. So after I start talking to people about why spies are not what you see in Hollywood, I start to get into the way that they're so elite at connection. So that's really the kind of thing that keeps it all together.
What's really interesting to me is that I think a lot about the way in which our ability to listen, to empathize, to reason gets undermined when we go into fight or flight under pressure, right? We often find ourselves in situations where we get triggered in some way, and then we struggle to show up in the ways that we want to show up and that we hope we will show up when those moments arise. I think what's really fascinating about what you're talking about is you're describing this specialized skill in people who are working in very high pressure situations, right? So is this something that they are taught and train in very rigorously? Like, how do they get to this level?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a high degree of training, and I spend a chapter of my book, focused in part on what I describe diffusing emotional encounters. And I worked with some incredible members, mainly of the law enforcement community, who you can imagine, have to be adept at that. So I provide a variety of different frameworks about how to get people to calm down in an office or in an everyday setting, trying to identify if the situation is focused on someone being upset at you or upset at the situation. So, it's little things like that, inviting the person to sit down. If they won't sit down, don't stand up, because that raises the emotional and, temperature of the room. Let them fully vent. So I provided other strategies to help people calm down. And you're absolutely right in that first remark that you had introducing the question here, that I like to say that emotion trumps cognition. And I remind people that, after you've had an emotional argument with somebody, a lot of times people say later, oh, why didn't I think of this? Like one thing that they should have said. That's because your mind is choked with emotion. So you're literally not thinking clearly when you're dealing with an emotional encounter. And it can be very, challenging. We all have, tempers. I certainly do. You get upset at something. So it's very hard to sort of get hold of your emotions. But if you can do so, you'll be at an advantage, and you can avoid some bad, circumstances if you make the wrong move. And you can also understand the other side a little bit more if you can calm down and help them calm down as well.
Yeah, I think that is so important, especially in a time where we're experiencing rapid, unpredictable change. People are just feeling stress in so many areas of their lives.
Totally.
So everybody's sort of very,
On edge.
yes, exactly. Very little patience, so very, very much on edge. And so, do you have advice for people who know that they may, you mentioned knowing that you have a temper, maybe need to do some work on this, and how to kind of get started in that? I know this is a lifetime journey. We can probably always get better, but do you see a natural starting point for people who maybe haven't spent the time thinking about this?
Well, they should, as a starting point, go out and buy my book and learn all the lessons in the book, But, I think I just shared a couple quick things there, let people vent, like when you're dealing with someone who's upset at something at you, whether it's someone who works for you or with you, whether it's your spouse, whether it's somebody that you meet on the street, you're oftentimes the first instinct is to say, no, 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 you're wrong. That didn't happen that way, or you're not thinking of this. The best thing to do is to let that person fully vent. And so that's a good starting point for diffusing an emotional encounter. I always reference one of my mentors, someone I talk about in the book is named Gary Nessner. He's a former chief hostage negotiator at the FBI. He's the guy kind of behind the Waco series on Netflix, a really fascinating character. And he wrote a memoir called Stalling for Time. And a lot of FBI hostage negotiators will tell you that they play this out on a longer scale because, it gives you time to calm down. That's another tip in these emotional encounters. If you do some of the things I write about in my book, or try to get things to calm down and they're really not getting there, stall for time, say, can we speak about this later or tomorrow? And watch how it's that much easier. But if you let somebody who's angry with you kind of vent and go through it, it gives you time to also like take a breath, calm your emotions, breathe deeply, and think about, what will be the right response that won't escalate the situation, that'll calm things down. So you need to invest in understanding some of the strategies, such as I write about in the book, but also starting with, letting someone vent is a great first place tip that I would share with people.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And that kind of takes me back to what you had said earlier about really thinking about whether the person is upset with you or with the situation. And I think it's human nature to personalize every situation that we're part of. And because we're doing that, we're not creating emotional distance in this situation. So it's really hard to let the person vent or to slow things down if you are interpreting this as a personal attack or you feel
Hmm.
the need to defend yourself in some way, right? So I think that's a big part of it too, is just being able to say, this isn't about me right now.
Well, or identifying that it is about you. There's a colorful way getting to this thesis. In law enforcement, these guys kind of get right to the chase, and I won't use the more colorful language, but it's either an F this or F you situation.
Mhm.
And to your point, if you identify that it's not about the situation, that someone has a problem with you specifically, that's where these guys in law enforcement, have to recognize that, hey, self-defense needs to be a part of this, or I need to understand that this person, might attack me or something. So I don't want to split hairs or anything. You're absolutely right in pretty much everything you're saying, but the framework that I'm offering is also has an underlying tone of safety, of personal safety, because you need to understand if it's an F this situation, you can work together to see what you can do about the situation. If it's about your race, if it's about, something about you that you really can't control, you better be able to, understand the situation and keep yourself safe.
Is there anything else people should think about in that case? Because I think you're absolutely right. There's a different consideration there when it comes to the personal hostility than it is
Yeah.
just a situation. And I mean, to be fair, people knock on wood, people in corporate environments are less likely to face the kind of threats that we're talking about. We're talking about law enforcement, but still, people feel personally threatened in those moments. So, is there anything
Yeah.
else you should be thinking about from a safety perspective?
Well, I just real quick on the corporate side, if you do identify it's not about the situation, it's about you. Again, I think you're right. I don't think you need to worry about self-defense as much in a corporate environment, but you need to understand that this person might have a real some problem with you. And that's where you need to start getting your manager or HR involved. And that's why the framework is still useful in a corporate setting, because, you might, and there's shades of gray here, of course, too. It might seem like the situation, but you could really realize that it's a personal problem. So I think the framework still applies in that respect. But in the setting we're talking about when it comes to security, it really depends. Are you a woman and it's a man who's many times bigger than you? Well, if you have mace in your pocket or something like that, now might be the time to at least subtly reach in and get it. Can you get yourself out of the situation? Can you, note to a bystander, hey, I'm feeling threatened right now. Or if it's, a peer adversary, are you trained in self-defense? Do you feel like you can handle it? And if you can't and you feel threatened, how do you extricate yourself from the situation? And, I know some seriously tough dudes who can handle just about any situation. So, grain of salt with what I just said, like, nobody wins in a fight and you want to do whatever you can to avoid it. So, try to get yourself out of it as much as possible is a better move than, resorting to violence. But you need to defend yourself sometimes against crazy people. So understand that.
Yeah, and some of what I'm thinking about too is you need to have the presence of mind to think about some of these things. And
Sure.
certainly the fight or flight instinct will kick in, and often, goes into that natural survival mode. But outside of that, what I'm thinking about is the importance of really strategizing ahead of time. I often think about really thinking through in a neutral moment how you might handle a difficult interaction with somebody,
Sure.
just so that you're not thinking for the first time in that moment, right?
Absolutely. That's why, reading about these things, thinking about them, how would I handle this? It's all, good. These emotional encounters, sometimes you have a chance to prepare for it. You have a meeting with somebody. It could be, very tense, a phone call, something like that. But a lot of times they pop up, someone storms into your office or you bump into somebody on the street, whatever it might be. It can be difficult to prepare for that. But, understanding that these moments will for sure happen in your life and reading about it, planning how would I handle it, what are my weak points, what are my strengths, is a good thing to do.
Absolutely. I think to your point, you can't anticipate every specific situation, but you can anticipate that you will encounter conflict at some point. So being thoughtful about how you want to show up in those moments is worthwhile.
Totally.
How do you see self-doubt, if at all, playing into this? Obviously, we talked to some extent about imposter syndrome on this show, and I'm curious about the role that our own mindset plays in what you're talking about. It strikes me that you kind of have to have a certain level of confidence or belief in yourself to be able to engage effectively in these interactions.
That's an interesting point. I can't say that I've pondered it that deeply. Being comfortable with yourself and trying to, be truthful with yourself, I think would put you in a, calm, confident position to understand, your weaknesses and strengths and all of these. And we've been going over some of them. Are you a large person who can handle themselves physically and that, might even cause somebody on the other side to pause if they're upset with you? Or are you a smaller person, that, could find yourself threatened? Having a little bit of self-confidence will be helpful, and understanding your weaknesses will be helpful as well.
Do you think there's any value, or do you see this happening in the groups or in the people that you're talking about, of getting external feedback as well on what some of those strengths and weaknesses might look like?
Always great to get external feedback on your strengths and weaknesses, especially if it's, a scenario that could be really tense or something that you're pretty certain will come up and you want to train for it. Talking to trusted colleagues, family, good friends about, hey, how do you see me react under pressure? How do people react to me when, they're upset? Learn that kind of feedback is really good for growth.
Yeah, and I understand it can be challenging. I mean, nobody likes getting tough feedback, but it's really helpful if you are serious
Hmm.
about making the kind of changes that we're talking about here. And so to just be willing to go out there and have honest conversations.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and you're also making me think about, and you've touched on this in different contexts, of just the importance of really knowing who your allies are in some of these situations, because I think
Hmm.
sometimes we have a tendency to go it alone, or we forget in the moment that we don't have to do everything ourselves. And so you had mentioned earlier the idea of raising it to your manager, to HR, just not feeling like you're on an island when you're encountering these types of challenges is really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just tactically dealing with tense situations. So, when an FBI hostage negotiator is dealing with a siege, he or she, the individual who's leading the negotiation, is not taking notes. So they're on there and they're trying to verbally mirror the person. They're trying to understand. I offer a framework for negotiation that is sourced from these, FBI hostage situations. So they have their hands full speaking to the person. They have someone with them that is taking notes on the situation. So understand that your brain can, most effectively process kind of, one thing at a time that you can really focus on, and having someone come with you to a tense negotiation where you're going to be involved in, using the skills I write about, eliciting things, having a framework for negotiation, making good eye contact, reading body language. Let someone else on the team, perhaps someone junior that could benefit from your experience, come along and take notes. So I've seen it in the consulting world, especially in business development. People think, yeah, I can go it alone, or I want all the credit. I'm the star here. I've never been like that. I always wanted to leverage allies especially if I could feature expertise that will help me move the agenda along. So I'm a big fan of that approach.
I really like that too. And I think, I can imagine circumstances in which this may not be the case, but I also think if you have somebody, particularly someone who's taking notes or somebody who's sort of, an observer might
Hmm.
diffuse some of the tension too, because if it's just two of you face to face, right, that might be a different level of intensity than if you have
Sure.
a more neutral party in the room with you.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you think that, especially people in more traditional work environments, should be thinking about when it comes to managing themselves under pressure or helping to diffuse some of the tension when it comes to, emotional figures on the other side of the table?
Yeah, I mean, a couple other little tips. If you're on the other side of an emotional situation, I've given you some tips already. Let that person vent, invite them to sit down, ask a clarification question, even though you're probably ready to contradict them, because that will continue to get them talking. And the more they talk, the more that they unburden themselves and exhaust themselves, the better that chance you have of getting to a positive outcome. I tell people, that you should offer them the chance to suggest a resolution. What do you think should be done here? And a lot of times what you see is someone who is still emotional will say something, a little bit more extreme. I think that person should be fired, and then you kind of let it sit there for a moment. Don't respond right away. Let that, a little bit of crazy statement sit in the room and see if that oftentimes will put a pin in their bubble of anger. And they might say, well, I'm just angry about the way so and so behaved. So if you invite someone to participate in the resolution of what's happening, it could be a helpful way to get that situation to calm down.
I love that idea. I think that is a very effective strategy because that also gives them a sense of ownership over the path forward, right? And I think at the end of the day, so much of what you're talking about is helping the other person feel heard. And
Absolutely.
if they haven't had that chance to vent, like you're saying, they're in a particularly emotional moment, giving them the space to just kind of get it out of their system, right, can go a long way and
100%.
temperature down. And also to your point, pacing is so important because if you immediately jump in, you're just going to escalate. But like you said, if you just kind of let it hang there for a minute, they themselves might realize, maybe that's not the best path forward.
Absolutely. And in terms of pacing, that makes me think of another great tip, which is, I've heard FBI guys call it the FM radio voice. Like if you use a calm and slow manner of speaking, which is absolute tradecraft with FBI hostage negotiations. They have someone on the other end that's, yelling and angry. They will not take the bait and they will not yell and be angry. They will not rise to insults. So if you can take that approach of making sure that you're insisting on the social norm of speaking calmly and in a deliberate manner, human beings tend to resort to that norm. You'll see groups of people and they're waving their arms around. They're all talking in an animated fashion. Other times they're scratching their chin and they're very, pensive because we accept the norms around us. We're social creatures. So you can insist on that behavior and it will lower the temperature of the room.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, is we kind of mirror each other. And so if you
Sure.
see the steady presence in the room, you might bring that person into that mode. And the other thing I was going to ask you about too is we've talked a little bit about what you do outside of the room to prepare for this. You can't know for sure how you're going to show up until the real moment hits, right? I mean, there's only so much you can rehearse or practice, but I wonder, as you were talking about speaking calmly and the FM radio voice, do you recommend, or maybe where do you recommend, practicing some of these things in real life so that they become a more natural part of your repertoire? Because one of the things that I think about too is that I often recommend people speak slowly because it's also a way of managing your confidence when you're in a situation where you feel like maybe you're rambling or you're not having as much success articulating what you want to say. And I recommend like practice that in other situations because if it becomes more natural to you, you'll be able to use it when you really need it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct in that. And, my response on where to practice is with your family. I mean, obviously whether it's just, you're at home with your spouse or you have kids, like we argue, with people closest to us because we're in such proximity. So instead of flying off the handle next time, see if you can use that FM radio voice or when they get mad at you and see if you can calm it down. So I think that's the best place to practice.
I'm going to try that with my husband next time.
Yeah,
That'll be a good practice ground.
absolutely.
This has been so fantastic, Jeremy. I really appreciate this. It very much aligns with my own mission of trying to give people tools to manage themselves in the moment because that emotional response dominates. And then we end up, like you said, doing things we're not proud of or just making the situation worse. I love the angle that you bring and, the focus on some of these law enforcement people that sort of have mythical notions of based on Hollywood. I would love to, first of all, invite you to share any final thoughts you have, but also to let us know where we can find your book and just continue to stay connected with you for anyone who's interested.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, final thoughts, the people that I've highlighted, I have a massive admiration for. We tend to thank members of our military for their service. They wear uniforms and they can recognize them. I try to bring a light to, others, whether they're in the FBI or the CIA that quietly serve our country, protect our national security. And we typically only hear about if there's a big problem. So, keep these folks in mind. They do incredible work and they have amazing skills. So I like shining a light on that. And I hope people will consider reading the book and learning about how they are very, far from many aspects of Hollywood. And in fact, they're actually more interesting in my estimation. So I hope people read the book and learn from that. It's available, on Amazon and any place you want to buy a book. It's the audio version is read by me if you're enjoying my FM radio voice over here. You can find me at selllikeaspy.net is my website. I tend to post and interact with people on LinkedIn. And I do keynote talks, training sessions for corporations, motivational kind of lunch and learns, and would love to hear from any member of your audience that wants to engage.
Wonderful. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.